Welcome back to the channel where we explore self-development, stoicism, and spirituality to help you grow in every area of your life. Today we're diving into one of the most important and overlooked forces shaping your mindset, the inner critic. Let's uncover where this voice comes from, how it holds you back, and most importantly, how to silence it and reclaim your power. Chapter 1. What is the inner critic and where does it come from? Let's begin with a voice that most of us know all too well, but rarely stop to examine. It's the voice that says, "You're not ready. You always mess things up. They're better than you." This is the inner critic, the internal voice of self-doubt, fear, and judgment. It's subtle. It often sounds logical. And worst of all, it wears 1,000 disguises. What is the inner critic? The inner critic is the part of your mind that sabotages your growth, that questions your worth, magnifies your flaws, and convinces you that failure is inevitable. It might try to motivate you with shame, or claim to be protecting you from disappointment. But in truth, it's driven by fear of rejection, fear of failure, and even fear of success. That it's not your intuition. It's not your truth. It's a program, one you probably didn't even choose. Where does it come from? Let's trace it back. This voice often takes root in childhood. A critical parent who meant well but always pointed out your mistakes. A teacher who praised only perfection. A moment when you tried, failed, and felt deeply embarrassed. Your brain remembered those moments. And it started building mental rules. Don't stand out too much. If you fail, it means you're a failure. Play it safe. Over time, those protective thoughts hardened into beliefs. And now, that inner critic speaks not in warnings but in judgments. And it doesn't stop with childhood. We're shaped by culture, media, and society, all promoting an unattainable standard of success, beauty, intelligence, or achievement. So we internalize these standards and turn them against ourselves. Now here's where it gets even trickier. The inner critic doesn't always sound mean. Sometimes it sounds reasonable. It says, "Let's be realistic here. You're just not cut out for that. Don't get your hopes up." Sometimes it pretends to be motivation. "Push harder, you're still not doing enough. You're lazy. No wonder you haven't succeeded." But instead of building you up, it wears you down. It turns self-improvement into self-punishment. Here's something you need to hear. Even the most successful people, entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, they all face the inner critic. That voice doesn't go away when you reach a certain level. It just shifts the target. Instead of, "You'll never make it," it becomes, "You better not mess this up." So remember, the presence of doubt doesn't mean the absence of ability. It means you're human, and your mind is trying to protect you using outdated programming. Let's ground this in ancient wisdom. The Stoics taught us that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. They understood that our perception shapes our experience. Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb us but our opinions about them." The inner critic is just that, an opinion, not a fact. And one of the Stoics' greatest teachings is this: you are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them. When we realize that, we begin to disarm the critic and take back our power. So now we've met the inner critic. We've traced its roots, from childhood wounds to societal pressure to perfectionist patterns. And we've begun to see that it isn't truth. It's just fear, wearing a very convincing mask. In the next chapter, we'll dive into how the inner critic shapes your everyday life, from your emotions and habits to your relationships and goals. Because when you see its full impact, you'll be even more ready to let it go. Until then, remember, just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Chapter 2. How the inner critic affects your life. Now that we've uncovered what the inner critic is and where it comes from, let's talk about how it actually shows up in your daily life. Because the truth is, most of us live under its influence, often without realizing it. The inner critic doesn't just whisper in moments of weakness. It shapes how you feel, how you behave, and how you relate to others. Let's break it down. 1. Emotional impacts, the invisible weight you carry. First and foremost, the inner critic weighs heavily on your emotional well-being. It creates a constant state of anxiety because you're always bracing for failure or judgment. Guilt, for not doing or being enough. Shame, the belief that something is wrong with who you are. Low self-worth, the feeling that you don't deserve love, success, or rest. You begin to measure your value by your mistakes instead of your effort. And when that happens, even your wins feel temporary. You think, "Yeah, but I got lucky." "Sure, but I could have done better." You become your own worst critic, and that voice becomes louder than any external praise. 2. Behavioral effects, How the critic controls your actions. Emotion drives action. So when your emotions are tangled with criticism, your behavior changes too. Here's how. Procrastination. You delay tasks not because you're lazy but because you fear failing or not doing them perfectly. Over-preparing or overcompensating. You obsessively rehearse, plan, or triple-check things just to feel good enough. Playing small. You avoid opportunities because deep down, you feel unworthy of success or attention. Perfectionism. You set impossibly high standards, and then punish yourself for not meeting them. Ironically, the inner critic says it's pushing you to improve, but it ends up paralyzing you. You live in fear of missteps, and as a result, you stop living boldly. 3. Relationship struggles. When the inner critic talks through you. The critic doesn't stay locked inside your mind. It spills into your relationships too. You apologize excessively even when you haven't done anything wrong. You become defensive because you're already judging yourself before others can. You seek constant validation, trying to quiet the inner voice by proving your worth to others. Or you push people away assuming they'll reject you eventually, so why not leave first? You might even project your inner critic onto others, assuming they see you the way you see yourself. That's the thing. When your relationship with yourself is filled with judgment, it colors every connection you have. 4. Metaphor, the distorted mirror. Let's use a metaphor to bring this to life. Imagine you're looking into a funhouse mirror. The reflection you see is warped, your head looks huge, your body stretched or compressed. Now imagine that mirror is the inner critic. It doesn't show you who you really are. It reflects a distorted version of you based on fear, past wounds, and false beliefs. But here's the problem. You've been looking into that mirror for so long. You think it's the truth. You don't question it. So your job isn't to become better. It's to realize the mirror is broken. 5. A brief story, breaking free from the voice. Let me give you a short hypothetical scenario. Imagine someone named Maya, a talented writer who dreams of publishing her first book. But every time she sits down to write, her inner critic chimes in. This isn't original. No one will care. You're wasting your time. So she keeps editing the same paragraph, for months. Eventually she starts avoiding her writing altogether. She tells herself she's just busy, but deep down it's fear. Then one day she catches the voice. She writes it down. And she challenges it. Is it true no one will care? Or is that just fear talking? Even if it's imperfect, isn't finishing the book better than silencing my voice? Maya doesn't quiet the critic overnight. But now she sees it for what it is. A scared part of her that doesn't get to drive anymore. And little by little she finishes her book. That's the power of awareness. Here's the takeaway. The inner critic affects more than just your confidence. It shapes how you act, feel, connect, and dream. But once you start recognizing its patterns, you weaken its power. Because what you can observe, you can overcome. In the next chapter, we'll dive into specific tools and practices from Stoic philosophy and spirituality, so you can finally begin to quiet that voice and replace it with something wiser. Something more compassionate. Something that sounds a lot like your true self. Chapter 3. Tools to quiet the inner critic, Stoic and spiritual approaches. Now that we've seen how the inner critic shapes your emotions, behaviors, and relationships, let's explore the most powerful part of this journey, how to quiet that voice. Because the goal isn't to eliminate the inner critic. It's to stop letting it control your life. To hear it, but not obey it. Let's start with the ancient Stoics. 1. Stoic detachment. You are not your thoughts. One of the most powerful Stoic ideas comes from Epictetus. It's not things that disturb us, but our opinion about them. Now apply this to the inner critic. It's not the thought, I'm not good enough, that ruins your confidence. It's believing that thought without question. The Stoics practiced cognitive detachment. They knew. You are not your thoughts. You are the one observing those thoughts. So the next time your inner critic says something harsh, instead of reacting, pause and ask, is this true? Is this helpful? Would I say this to a friend I love? 2. Labeling thoughts as opinions, not facts. Here's a psychological tool that aligns beautifully with Stoic thinking. Cognitive distancing. When your inner critic speaks, try this. Instead of saying, I'm a failure, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. It's a small shift, but powerful. It reminds you that this is just a mental event, not reality. This simple sentence puts space between you and the voice. And in that space you regain control. 3. Journaling to expose thought loops. Journaling isn't just about writing down your day. It's about revealing your patterns. Here's a technique you can use daily. Start by writing. What is my inner critic saying today? Then ask, where did this belief come from? What evidence supports or disproves it? What would my most compassionate self say instead? Over time, your journal becomes a record of your growth. You'll begin to recognize familiar lies and replace them with truths. For reframing with Stoic wisdom, is this in my control? Marcus Aurelius famously wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. When the inner critic strikes, ask, is this in my control? Your past mistakes? No. Other people's opinions? No. How you treat yourself today? Absolutely yes. Reframing your thoughts using this Stoic lens gives you power. It reminds you that you're not helpless, you're in charge. 5. Spiritual practices. Trusting the bigger picture. Now let's shift into the spiritual side of this. Because sometimes logic isn't enough. The voice inside isn't just irrational, it's emotional. And what the inner critic fears most is surrender. Here's how to approach it spiritually. Affirmations. Create a few gentle truths to repeat daily. I am enough as I am. My mistakes do not define me. I choose progress over perfection. I am safe to grow, fail, and begin again. Say them in the mirror. Write them in your journal. Whisper them in silence. Over time, these words plant new beliefs. Mindfulness. Sit in stillness and simply observe your thoughts, without judgment. Let them rise, and let them pass. You'll begin to see that the inner critic is just one voice among many, and not the one you have to follow. Prayer or inner dialogue. Talk to your higher self, God, the universe, however you define it. Ask for help in seeing your worth clearly. Ask for strength in moments of doubt. Ask for peace when the voice gets loud. Even just saying, I'm willing to see this differently, is a powerful start. 6. Daily mantras. To shift the dialogue. Here are a few mantras you can adopt into your routine. I choose to speak to myself with truth and kindness. Today I return to my inner peace. I am stronger than the voice that doubts me. I trust the process of becoming. I am learning, and that is enough. Say them at the start of your day. Repeat them when the inner critic gets loud. Write them on sticky notes, or set them as reminders on your phone. Every repetition builds a new inner voice. Not the critic, but the guide, which we'll explore next. Your inner critic has had the microphone for too long. It's time to turn down the volume, and turn up something wiser. Remember, you are not your thoughts. Not every voice in your head is telling the truth. And with the right tools, you can choose a kinder narrative. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to replace the inner critic with your inner guide, the calm, wise part of you that already knows the way. Chapter 4. Replacing the inner critic with the inner guide. We've spent the last chapters identifying the inner critic, its voice, its origins, its damage, and the tools to quiet it. But healing doesn't stop at silencing the critic. We now shift into something even more powerful. Replacing it with your inner guide, a voice of calm, wisdom, and truth. This is the voice you were born with, the one beneath all the noise. Let's learn how to find it, and let it lead. 1. What is the inner guide? Think of the inner guide as the wise mentor within you. It's not driven by fear, ego, or pressure. It's the voice that says, you've been through hard things before, and you grew. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy. Take the next step. You're ready? Where the inner critic uses shame, the inner guide uses curiosity. Where the critic demands, the guide encourages. Where the critic punishes, the guide teaches. This voice is already inside you. You just need to strengthen the connection. 2. Practices to strengthen the inner guide. Start talking to yourself like a coach would, not like a bully. Ask, what's the lesson here? What would future me want me to do? If I were mentoring a friend, what advice would I give? Then, take that advice. Self-coaching builds inner resilience. You become your own source of clarity. Try this. Close your eyes and picture your highest self. What do they look like? How do they walk, speak, and make decisions? How do they treat themselves after a mistake? Now imagine that version of you guiding you through your day. Let them speak louder than the critic. This mental rehearsal rewires your nervous system. It shifts you from reaction to intention. The inner critic sees what's missing. The inner guide sees what's already good. Every day, write down 3 things you're grateful for about yourself. A quality you showed, kindness, courage, patience. A challenge you handled. A small step you took. This tunes your brain to recognize growth, not just gaps. It teaches you to honor yourself, not attack yourself. Sometimes your inner guide is hard to hear. So borrow the voice of someone wiser. This could be a real-life mentor, a spiritual teacher, a philosopher or writer who inspires you, even a version of your future self. Ask, What would they say to me right now? Let their words shape your self-talk, until that wisdom becomes your own. 3. Daily consistency. The key to rewiring. Here's the truth. Your inner guide doesn't get louder on its own. You need to practice listening. Every single day you are strengthening one of two voices, the critic who doubts you or the guide who supports you. It's not about perfection. It's about showing up daily and choosing the voice that brings peace. Set reminders. Leave notes. Build rituals that remind you, I am becoming someone who trusts themselves. For real-life example, from critic to guide, let me share a quick story. You can adapt this with a personal or fictional example. Meet Sarah. For years, her inner critic told her she wasn't smart enough to go back to school. Every time she considered it, the voice whispered, "You'll fail. You're too old. You're not capable." But one day Sarah paused. She wrote down the voice. She asked herself, what would I say to a friend who felt this way? Her answer was kind, encouraging, and honest. She made it her daily script. Over time she applied. She studied. She passed. She graduated, with honors. Not because the critic disappeared, but because she followed a stronger voice. You've heard the inner critic for years. You know what that voice sounds like. Now it's time to hear someone else. The real you. The calm, grounded, courageous version of yourself that's always been waiting to lead. That's your inner guide. Let them speak more often. In the final chapter, we'll explore what life can look like when you live with compassion and confidence, when your inner voice becomes your greatest ally. Chapter 5. Living with Compassion and Confidence. You've made it here. You've unpacked the inner critic, explored its roots, learned how to quiet it, and most importantly, how to replace it with your inner guide. But what happens next? In this final chapter, we'll explore how your life transforms when you stop living under the weight of self-judgment and begin walking with compassion and confidence. Let's talk about what that really looks like. 1. A life without the inner critic in control. When the inner critic stops dominating your thoughts, you don't become lazy. You become free. Free to try things without paralyzing fear. Free to grow, mess up, and learn without shame. Free to enjoy your own company. Suddenly, decisions feel lighter. You're not second-guessing every move. You start asking, what would feel meaningful today? Instead of, what will make me finally feel enough? Confidence isn't arrogance. It's the quiet belief that your voice, your ideas, and your presence matter. 2. Compassion as a daily practice. Confidence grows where compassion lives. We often think compassion is something we give others. But how often do we give it to ourselves? Self-compassion means forgiving yourself when you fall short, speaking to yourself with patience, allowing yourself to rest without guilt. It's not weakness, it's what makes strength sustainable. A Stoic would tell you, you are not disturbed by things, but by your judgment of them. Compassion softens judgment. It creates space for healing and growth. 3. Learn to catch the critic and redirect. Let's be honest, the inner critic won't vanish overnight. But now you're aware. You can spot it. You can choose not to obey. Every time the voice shows up and says, you're not enough, you pause and ask, is that true or just familiar? You become the observer, not the prisoner. And in that moment of awareness, you reclaim your power. That's what living consciously looks like. Treat yourself like someone worth loving. Imagine treating yourself with the same care you give a loved one. What would change? Would you push through burnout or allow yourself rest? Would you shame yourself for small mistakes or show compassion? Would you constantly compare or celebrate your growth? The way you speak to yourself writes the story of your life. Make it a kind one. Here's a truth to remember. You don't have to be hard on yourself to be worthy. You already are. 5. Daily reminder and affirmation. Let's end this chapter with a simple mantra. Repeat it, write it down, or make it your lock screen. Brain. I'm not my thoughts. I choose to speak to myself with truth and kindness. I am growing and I am enough. You now hold something powerful. An awareness that you are not your inner critic. You have the ability to choose another voice, your inner guide, and live with more compassion and confidence. Speak kindly to yourself. The world needs your gifts, not your shame. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What's one thing your inner critic says, and what truth will you replace it with? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss the next episode. Each week, I share powerful tools to help you grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And if you're ready to keep going on this journey, Our next episode will guide you through a deeply inspiring topic: becoming your future self, how to align your daily actions with the person you're becoming. Remember, the most important voice in your life is your own. Choose for it to be your ally. See you next time.